Hello and welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. Conversational AI is an emerging market, and there are many industries actively investing in this space to optimize their operations or enhance their user experience. Finance tech is one such industry that is actively investing its efforts in conversational AI. In today's episode, Shyamala Prayaga speaks with Rana Gujral about voice first use cases in FinTech and why there is a boom. Rana Gujral is an entrepreneur, speaker, investor, and CEO at Behavioral Signals, an enterprise software company that excels at distinguishing behavioral signals in speech data with its proprietary deep learning technology. As a thought leader in the AI/technology space, he often leads keynote sessions and joins panel discussions at industry events such as World Government Summit, Voice Summit, the Next Web Conference, and Blockchain Economic Forum. His bylines are featured in publications such as Noonie, Voicebot.ai, SpeechTechMagazine, and he is a contributing columnist at TechCrunch and Forbes. He's been recognized as Entrepreneur of the Month by CIO Magazine, awarded U.S.-China Pioneer by IEIE, and listed as a top 10 entrepreneur to follow in 2017 by Huffington Post and an AI entrepreneur to watch, and incorporated in 2020 he won Contributor of the Year, Chatbots and Noonie's Awards. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to The Future is Spoken. Today I have a very, very special guest with me, Rana Gujral from Behavioral Signal. Welcome, Rana.
Thank you, Shyamala. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure of mine. So today we are going to talk about voice first use cases. But before we get started, why don't you tell us about your background? How did you get into the voice first?
Yeah, so see, my background, fortunately, I've been involved in some really interesting and iconic product journeys. I spent most of my early career years building product lines in large corporates. I had this opportunity to build a very interesting product called Kronos 4500 terminal at Kronos, which was immensely successful. It raked in almost $1 billion in revenue just during my tenure with Kronos. It was very, very validating and successful. Then I was part of this smart home version 1.0 journey at Logitech, where we acquired Harmony and built out some ancillary product lines around home entertainment, and also was part of the launch of Google TV, which was the first smart TV stack prior to, I guess, it being called Chrome Stick by Google. So it was a very interesting journey and an opportunity, and sort of looking out into the future in the landscape and sort of say what's bound to come, where the experiences are today and where we're headed. I then had an interesting opportunity to go do a private equity-backed turnaround. It was a company that sort of had shrunk into near bankruptcy, and we got it from a negative 100 million EBITDA to plus 12, and had a very successful outcome there. Following which I launched a machine learning startup called Ties, which was acquired by Alchemy in 2016. And so it's been like a series of interesting journeys. Behavioral Signals is an incredibly interesting company founded by 3 amazing scientists. They've had their own independent areas of focus, from speech synthesis, processing, to tonal analysis, to NLP. And I've had this opportunity to come in and lead the company to sort of put some of this technology use cases to some specific commercial uses. And so we've sort of like gone through a traditional journey of a deep tech startup, which is really spending the first few years finessing the technology and sort of identifying sort of like the intersects of sort of where those technology points can be adopted, and finding our niche and finding our sort of core value add in the industry. And so last year we launched a product called AI-mediated conversations, which is essentially an AI-based matchmaking engine between agents and clients. And we use tonal analysis or acoustics analysis to create what I call conversational bioprints, and we can get into more of that in detail. And then using that information, we can then find the best matches for the client, whether they're being called or they're calling in, which eventually then drives really amazing conversations. And then if you have amazing conversations, you tend to have great outcomes, which is what the use case is. So that's sort of been the journey, and it's been super exciting.
Wow. That's quite a journey for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there are so many things I want to talk to you about, right from what you're doing with the behavioral signal to the FinTech world, which we thought we'll start talking about. So let me start with the finance world, the fintech world, right? There's a lot of momentum nowadays. There are a lot of things happening in that aspect or area in general. And there has been a lot of momentum even with voice tech and conversational AI in that space. So, what kind of unique use cases do you see for voice first in that domain?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? I mean, improving the dynamics of conversations between your company and your clients, that is tend to what happens in a call center, is important for everybody, right? I mean, it's important for pretty much every sector out there. So it's not a value add that is unique for the financial institutions per se. And so financial institutions have been really savvy and in terms of also sort of adopting the general dynamics around conversational AI and voice AI. And so, and that I we definitely sort of see the case. But then there are specific opportunities that are unique for financial institutions, right? So if you kind of, take a step back and look at the landscape of what's sort of happening around us, the number of non-performing loans or NPLs during the 2009 financial crisis doubled from the pre-crisis levels. And the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown these levels into staggering heights. I mean, by the end of 2020, the US had 127 billion, which is up from 95 billion, by the way, end of 2019 in non-performing loans. And Europe was battling a 401 billion euro wave of new in the red loans, which is unprecedented in many ways. And so now that we've entered 2021, I mean, this will represent a significant strain on banks and financial institutions. And at the same time, the current methods of debt collection and contact centers are very inefficient, and they're largely driven by human operators and analysis using really old school technologies. And so our offering, such as AI mediated conversations or AMs, creates these predictive models that evaluates customers in real time and can help to transform this process with better profiling, prioritization, and just sort of like helping with the whole overall process of this complex conversation that is required in restructuring these NPLs. And so if you kind of look at, I mean, across the board, not just fintechs, I mean, call centers and call center efforts are generally reactive, largely reactive. Someone calls in and they're upset and humans respond accordingly, not always in the most effective way. And now you have this capability around these algorithms, similar to what we've developed, that can be used to rapidly evaluate and identify the behavioral patterns of these customers based on previous calls and observe the emotional data during the call. And this enables for faster call pairing to the best suited customer service agent to address the specific problems. And so now if you sort of apply that into the debt collection industry, that's probably, I'd say, one of the most complex conversations out there to be had, right? So if you think about a typical debt collector, debt holder conversation, it's full of emotion. There's a lot of things that can be taken out of context. People are generally very edgy and you need a lot of tact, but you also have to deal with the business. It's a complex conversation where you have to convince the client to pay what they owe, but also maybe work with them to negotiate a more favorable outcome. And it is a human to human negotiation process. It's not something that can be digitized. It's not something that you could say, oh, hey, here's a portal, go deal with these options. Maybe for microloans you can, maybe for some small stuff you can, but if it's like $1 million home loan, you can't. And a lot of these, I mean, it doesn't have to be $1 million home loan. It could be even a few $100K, but even that is life-saving for a lot of Americans and people across the globe. So it is not a conversation that can be resolved without complex human to human discussion. And so in that dynamic, all of these metrics that are important for call centers become accentuated, right? So first call resolution becomes accentuated times 10. This is really where you really have one shot to go make this successful. And if you have a bad conversation, you probably won't get a chance to talk to the client again. You would get blocked. And so, I mean, if you look at that landscape of conversations and tough conversations, and then use and see that opportunity of improving that entire dynamic by doing some intelligent agent client pairing, which is what AIMC does. Financial sector is probably a really good place to start. And so that's been our focus. So we focus on that industry, primarily focused on large commercial banks and traditional banks, but also collections conglomerates and BPOs, et cetera.
Wow. So this is very interesting. The first thing is people like talking with a human, and we are trying to completely automate those things by using an agent or a voice assistant specifically. So this is one step ahead of IVRs, right? So we already have IVR systems which is able to do some of the things for us, but for NPLs and stuff, what you're saying is now there is a voice assistant which is going to take care of some of these things. So with the smart pairing, like you mentioned. Now, my question to you is many people told me that they don't like talking to a machine about certain things, right? So, did you do any kind of research around this, knowing that people will be interested to talk to an agent when they have been smartly paid?
Yeah. I mean, so first off, let's take a look at this dynamic of agent client conversation, because the entire spectrum of conversation AI, including the voice AI, is sort of focused on optimizing this dynamic. There are three phases roughly, right? So there is the phase before that conversation happens. Then there is a phase when the conversation's happening, and then there's a phase after the conversation's concluded. Now, if you look at the variety of speech analytics and conversational AI systems and solutions out there, they tend to all focus on creating value in that last phase, which is, hey, my conversation's ended. What can I gather from that? How do I measure experience and engagement and rapport? And so you have these various solutions that are sort of like looking at it after the fact, and you sort of feeding that back into the agent to do their jobs better. There are some solutions that also sort of operate in the phase two, which is how do I help the agent while the conversation's happening live. But for the most part, the industry's ignored the first phase, which is before the conversation happens. What can you do to improve the outcome before the conversation happens? Well, you can do a lot. You can train the agents better. You can coach the agents better. You can find out more about the clients, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are fine. But probably the best thing you can do is to put right people in front of each other. And we all have a unique speaking dynamic, right? So if you take a look at in a professional setting, we're constantly meeting and interacting with new people. And while our personal relationships are naturally curated, either by decades of familiarity or through personal preferences in who we engage with, the professional relationships are often thrown upon us, right? So we don't choose who we work with, and to some extent who we work with. And to be successful, we must make these relationships work. And there's always an optimal setting that allows for both sides to achieve the desired outcome in a business environment. And that comes down to natural rapport between the two people. And that rapport can be influenced by the right conversations and the right responses at the right times, whether it's a sales call with a prospect or a support call with a customer or a difficult conversation, collections and business. Eventually, any interaction between sort of two humans is sort of driven by the affinity between the two humans. And so what we've been able to do is we've sort of been able to sort of key on that part, which is, hey, there are no good agents or bad agents. There's no good clients or bad clients, as is commonly used in the industry. Good agents, bad agents, let's optimize good agents. So let's make the bad agents better agents. Essentially, there are good matches and bad matches. And when you curate good matches, then you have great conversations, as in general life, right? And when you have great conversations, you have great outcomes. And the outcome could be a sales outcome, it could be a customer service outcome, or it could be a collections outcome. And that's the simple premise. So now the question is, well, how do you actually build it in a scalable fashion, right? So what we've been able to do is we've been able to use our acoustics technology of unraveling these signals from the tone of voice and using that technology to create a conversational bioprint of all individuals involved, which is agents and clients, and then using that conversational bioprint to do matchmaking. And so if you're calling in into a call center, the call center automatically identifies you as an individual and already understands what your conversational bioprint is and finds you an agent to speak with who matches your conversational bioprint, which means when you guys are talking, foremost, you guys have a good conversational rhythm and a good conversation, and everything else flows from that, right? And so I think that's what we have done is not necessarily discovered a new thing. We've sort of taken a dynamic that has served us across humanity, and it's still relevant to us in our daily lives, and leverage that into to a conversational dynamic in a call center. And of course, I mean, with friends, you automatically know how to speak and where to speak. But so if you're going to do that in a business setting, we've taken our technology to sort of codify that and used AI to do this intelligent matchmaking based on this capability that we've had. So yeah, I mean, to answer your specific question, last year was actually a really interesting year for some of these dynamics to come into play. For years, the quest has been to do more and more digitization, which is it's purely driven by cost, right? Which is reduce the number of people in the call center, use more chatbots, use more voice bots, and or delay the human to human interaction as much as possible. And what we saw last year was there was an unprecedented amount of call volumes, and people were demanding. I mean, even the younger population, which has been generally okay in reacting through these digital platforms, have been demanding, no, I want to speak with a human, I want to talk with a human, I want to interact with a human. And then you also sort of see that when anything goes off script, where, let's say you're going to call your airline in a general way, like in a normal world, you would call your airline to get your seat assignments, or you would call your airline to make your flight changes or change things and whatnot. And so it's all scripted. You could sort of like manage that. When you go off the script and your airline shuts down or you can't travel and you don't know what's going to happen, chatbots can't handle that. So now you need a human, and the humans isn't available because everybody's calling. So and that's what happened last year, not in just airlines, across the board. Whether you were dealing with your order that you put in, or your Instacart cart order, or your Amazon thing, or this and that, I mean, everything just fell apart. And the aspect of human to human interaction came into play, and people have realized that this is a very crucial area of investment, and you can't just ignore it or shove it under the rug. And so that we've seen people now double down on voice AI and on conversational AI and improve the engagement and experience metrics. And specifically in the FinTech side, it's certainly played out as well.
That's because I mean, I personally have spoken with so many agents or chatbots, and there's certain information I would be willing to give, and certain information I want to really talk to a person because I want to get things done. The only reason, like just few months back, I was trying to interact with the IVR system in my for my home loan to get some information, and it was such a lengthy process, and there was so many things. First of all, I knew it's an IVR system, and it was asking me to go through option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, and all of those things. Chatbot or voice bots are nothing. They are also scripted in a way, like you mentioned, right?
Yes.
Either it could be a little bit of natural, which I don't know what they will support, so I need to learn. There's a learning curve. Or it will be very scripted, like you have buttons and you have to select those buttons and all. But if I know what I want to talk and I want to just directly jump into my query, how do we design solutions to solve for these kind of problems?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think I see that problem being solved. I mean, it's a multi-pronged problem, right? There's various aspects of a conversation. I mean, there are essential dynamics of understanding human and understanding the language, parsing that language for specific keywords, and then you're searching for the answers and then responding to the human in a human-like language, or that's the whole NLU or NLP capability sort of come into play, right? So let's say, for example, if you take an Alexa or Google, I mean, it's a similar type of interaction where you're saying something and the machine is trying to understand your language and process it. So some things you've gotten really good at, right? So we're really good at the NLP part of it, which is, I mean, we can process accents, we could process different dialects, we can process people speaking very fast and very slow and everything in the middle, and also multiple different languages. Now you can speak in your own native language and it will understand you. All of those things are good. I mean, on the backend side, that's never been a problem, right? So if you ask a specific question, the power of the CPU and memory, you can sort of get any computer to answer it. Now you've built intelligent engines that also allow you to answer specific questions related to your business model, which is, hey, I'm gonna cancel my credit card, this and that, blah, blah, blah. All of these things you can do. What you can do, even with all of this, and then you could take all that knowledge and respond back in a human sounding manner, which is the whole NLU part of it and sort of like the linguistics piece of it. But with all of that, you still can't hold a conversation, not even a 5-minute conversation. Forget about a minute, maybe not in a minute conversation. It's still transactional. I'm going to tell you something to do and you're going to do it, right? Why? Well, because holding a conversation requires a lot more. I mean, it requires you to understand, the other party to understand my state of mind, and then respond to their assessment of my state of mind. And that's how conversations happen, right? So like, for example, if I were to ask you a simple question, say, hey, Shyam, would you like to do this? And you respond back with a very sarcastic, sure, I can sense sarcasm. So I would say, okay, maybe now is not a good time, right? So, and that's a very simple example. But if you take that very simple one question with one word response in the human to Alexa context, and if Alexa asks you that question and you respond back with a sarcastic sure, she has no clue, right? Her answer would be, great, let's do it. Therein lies the whole sort of, okay, we can't really have a conversation. You're not human. You don't understand how I feel. And as a result, we can't really have a dialogue. Well, I can tell you to do something and you can tell me if you've done it or not. And so that's the missing piece. Right. So that's the missing piece, which when is sort of plugged into this communication dynamic, you can take that experience to a completely new level. And once you have that, you may at some point call in for a specific query to a company and you have somebody answer. The person on the other side already knows everything about you because they've used voice biometrics and other points of ID to understand that it's you who you're calling in. They have all the information there. And in seconds, they have come up to speed on all of your history and your buying history, and you already have a sense of what you're calling about. You're talking to that person. The person responds to you in a very empathetic manner. Maybe you're not empathetic. Maybe you're losing it on them, but they don't lose it back on you. They still keep calm. And if you're excited, they build on that excitement and they even sort of like have a conversation with you. And they solve a specific problem and you hang up and you've now had the most amazing conversation with a call center agent with a caveat that you didn't speak with a human. And that's now possible. I mean, it could be possible that you would have that conversation, and because it's infinitely scalable, because it's not a human, your call will be answered in minutes or seconds. As soon as the dial tone rings, somebody picks the phone up. And because it's not a human, all of your complex business history is already processed in microseconds and nanoseconds. And you're not spending the first 20 minutes explaining to them, hey, I've called 5 times. This is an issue I've been working with. What's the status of this and this and that? No, I mean, you're like, Shyamala, I know how you, are you calling about this? Let's talk about this. This is what the status is, this and that. And you can actually have a conversation like a human, right? So all of those things are possible only if you have the ability to understand the state of mind, because all these other pieces are there. But because you can't really have a conversation, you can't really use that ability.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I would love to have that kind of system where it understands. This is my biggest problem. Like the agent would ask the same questions, and then I have to repeat the same question to the real human, or we have to go on and on with the same things. So a lot of these things could be removed, or friction, I would say, could be removed if we have the biometrics information. Now, my biggest thing is voice is being used by so many people. There may be people who cannot speak, but they're still using voice in some or the other modality. Maybe they are using a multimodal system and still able to do it. If you are using voice only as the biometric system, how would you include more people into your solution?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, voice is just one of the modes that are relevant. It's not the only mode that is relevant, for sure, right? I mean, we as a company are certainly focused on voice. That happens to be our core competency, and that's what we're focused on. But including, I mean, even affect or emotion is multimodal. You express emotions through your facial expressions, through your body language, by saying specific things, sometimes by not saying something. You know, all of those different things sort of come into play, and they're all relevant, right? I mean, certainly if you're comparing performance of these modalities, voice is proven to be the most superior, but that doesn't mean those other modalities are not relevant. It does happen to be the most superior. There's a lot of studies done. I mean, the most famous of it was by Professor Krauss from Yale, and where he kind of proved it. He proved it that if you're measuring emotions just on the voice, you have a better read than when you're combining the voice and also the facial expression modality and you're putting together, because actually facial expressions are a poorer read of emotions. It actually throws you off. It gives you lots of false alerts, because we as humans are actually pretty good at masking our emotions on our facial expressions, and some even better than others, right? And but we're really actually very inept at doing the same with our tone of voice. Voice comes in from your stomach. I mean, it's from inside. It's from your lungs. I mean, it's part of your body. It's very visceral. You can't. Most people can't hide how they actually feel in the tone of voice. So some of the best salespeople and some best business coaches insist on having that first conversation on a phone, not on video, not on Zoom, not in person. Because when you have that person on the phone and you're not looking at anything, there's no facial expression, there's no video, you're just sort of tone of voice, you're connecting very, very viscerally. And you have a very good sense of how the other person's feeling. I said something, here's a response. Is a response excited, or is a response negative, or is positive? I mean, is the person engaged or disengaged? You can't tell. Your brain will process all of that for you. You don't need any AI technology for that, right? And so what we've done is we've codified that. Now we put it in the software program, and so now it's available for machines to use it and also software programs to use it. But that doesn't mean that these other modalities are not relevant. And I think the more sort of, I'd say, rounded solutions will leverage all of these different capabilities in an intelligent manner and express it. We were, looking at some of those sort of intersection points, and I think they're definitely relevant.
Yeah. Absolutely. So do you see in future like the brain computer interfaces or brain machine interfaces would have some synergy with all the different things you are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, right? I mean, one example is individuals and humans, and especially kids who suffer with autism. There's certainly a challenge there in terms of sort of processing certain emotional contexts and responses. And so if you can build a system that can help them gauge the emotional context and help them process it better, aid them through that process, it will create for a wonderful experience, right? So I think that's an example. But outside of that, I mean, not necessarily purely from a bionic mindset, but I mean, some of these solutions are used in that context today in call centers, right? So for example, if a call center agent is speaking with a client, they don't really need help in understanding how the client is feeling, to be honest, because the human brain can do it better than anybody else, right? So the human brain, their brain is telling them how the client is feeling. They're focused on that. They're focused on how the client is feeling, how the client is responding to what I'm doing, saying. What they need help with is how they're doing, because they're not focused on themselves, right? So an agent's so focused on the client typically that the agent does not realize that they're speaking too fast, or they're sounding angry, or they're sounding rude, or they're missing essential clues to ask for the close. They're missing all of that because they're focused on the client. Their entire brain is focused on the client. And so if you have an AI engine or AI assist that is sort of like guiding, hey, you're speaking too fast, slow down, or you sound angry, what you just said sounded rude. They're like, oh, okay, I'm glad somebody's pointing that out to me. And that's helpful for them, and they can recalibrate themselves. So I think not necessarily brain AI interaction from a bionic perspective, but it's a software program that is kind of doing it outside of the brain, I guess, and helping you through that process.
There's a lot here, right? I mean, human is a walking, talking, I don't know what to say. Our emotions, our body language, our voice, our expressions, even our facial expressions, like you mentioned, and the way someone interacts and everything, and even the words we speak, all of those can do a lot. What kind of, in the context of the customer care and fintech world, what kind of privacy issues, security issues do you see with these kind of systems? There's a lot of private information, right? Finance information.
Yeah, there's a lot of private. In fact, privacy and security are relevant for every sector, every vertical. And now it's the law, it's the regulations, and it's for the good. I mean, it's something that allow us to grow faster. I mean, I really believe that the regulations in this space are a good thing, because once you standardize that, then it allows you for a faster and a better adoption versus a whole percentage of the population scared to adopt something because it's a wild west. So it's a good thing, but it's also a huge challenge, right? So especially for financial sector, for financial institutions, they have a higher bar for GDPR. They have a higher bar for security and privacy. There's a lot of private contextual information that can never get into any wrong hands. I mean, your bank accounts and social security, your credit profile can destroy your life in wrong hands. And so if you ask Gartner, and if you look at some of these large studies that have been done around adoption of AI in financial sector, the number one and number two issues that banks say that prevent them from adopting a cool new AI technology is one, either complexity, because they're not technology institutions, so they want these solutions to be sort of leveraged within the ecosystem that they have. And probably the biggest one, the number one that issue that ranks up, is security and privacy. And in fact, banks will tell you this, and they have many times in the financial institutions, like they could have a big problem that they understand and recognize, and they could see a solution that can solve it very effectively. And that's typically true with a lot of this deep tech and AI solutions. They say, oh, that will fix my problem. But they're unable to use it, and they won't use that solution because they feel that it will potentially create new problems for them by not having adequate adherence to security and privacy and other requirements that they have. And so if you don't solve for that, you can't sell into financial sector. I mean, your business is the no-go from day one. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. You have to check off that box on day one. One of the big advantages that we have is our technology is innovative and revolutionary in a few different ways, but primarily the big thing that the big way that we're different from the rest of the pack is that we're purely acoustics based. We don't use speech to text or ASR, unlike the rest of the conversational AI industry. Pretty much the entire conversational AI space takes the audio, converts that into text, and now you're parsing the text for meaning, which is, hey, can I key off specific words, and can I do this and that? We don't use any of that, right? So we're purely acoustics based, which means it's unprecedented levels of privacy. You're not getting into the content of the conversation. You actually are not processing what the person is saying or the words being spoken. And so the sanctity of the discussion is preserved. And I mean, think about this. One of the big aspects of GDPR is redaction, very complex. If there's no text, there's nothing to redact. I mean, we don't even have text. I mean, there's nothing to redact. I mean, just purely acoustics profiles. So that, from a SOC 2 GDPR perspective, it offers unprecedented privacy, and financial institutions love it. Banks love that part. The other part, of course, is the advantage is that it makes you language agnostic, right? So if you're not focused on the conversation, the content, then the language doesn't matter. You could be speaking in any language or multiple languages at the same time, as often most people speak, and it doesn't matter. I mean, you could run our technology on a data set of any language in the world and get same results. So I think some of these things have matured and progressed over the last so many years that your existing tools do look a little bit dated. And I think that's a huge advantage that we have.
Cool. So this brings up a really, important question, which is, in the finance world, there's so much information being shared back and forth in general as well, right? Any kind of conversation. So Voice has been known to work for transactional, like you mentioned, use cases like what is the weather or find me on nearby Starbucks kind of things. But the moment you start thinking about complex use cases like voice comments, voice commerce, voice payments, or stuffs like that, that's where the actual problem starts of the cognitive load, like too much load on the user to do something, right? How do you solve for those kind of things with your systems?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we are taking away that cognitive load from the human and making it seamless for them, right? So, I mean, all of this analysis and intelligent decision making and matchmaking is done behind the scenes, right? So a human's not involved in that process. The human's only contributing to that process by their interactions, right? So the AI engine is processing all interactions, past and future, present, and constantly creating and optimizing these conversational bioprints. And so if a client needs to be called, it always has sort of identified who should be calling them. And those agents have those clients be propped on their dashboard or their CRM system and say, Mr. X, today you're going to be calling these people. We've decided that these people need to be called by you. Or if somebody's calling in, that call is automatically getting routed to an individual who's the best person. And the job of a human or a call center agent in this regard becomes to do what they do and be who they are. And that is the best thing we can hope for, right? So it's rather than think of the alternative, like, so let's say if a client, Mary, needs to be called and we know Mary would love to have a conversation in a specific way, or then you could say, okay, I'm going to take my agent John and train that agent John and teach that agent John on how to speak with Mary. And now Mary and John can, I mean, is that practical? No. I mean, you can't do that. You can't achieve that. You're not going to be able to teach each agent to speak to a individual client. But if Mary needs to be called and you'll run the AI through your systems and you say, oh, I have Rob who would have a conversation, which is very much how it should be when you're speaking with Mary. All you need to do at that point is get Rob and Mary together. That's it. And then Rob be who Rob is and not change a thing. You're not coaching Rob. You're not telling Rob how to speak. You're saying, Rob, go speak with Mary, and Rob's going to speak how he speaks. And that is the perfect outcome that you want. And that is scalable. And now if you can sort of make that happen, so you really try to look at the best that each of your agents have to offer and bring it to the forefront and leverage those capabilities. And you're spreading your core, sort of like I say, core competency, and leveraging your core competency across all your agent base rather than just focusing on your best performing agents or from that perspective.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you are tackling the problem from a completely different kind of area, I would say, which is really nice. The entire of conversation industry deals with a lot more in a different way. Like you mentioned, ASR and LU and all of those things is one part of it, but the cognitive load is the other part of things. And I'm seeing that you are taking away all of the heavy lifting kind of things, a job from the user, and easing the conversation for them, which is kind of really cool. So what kind of best practices have you created in order to design conversations for the fintech world?
I mean, look, I think there are a whole variety of considerations that you need to have when you're building any AI solution, and that's no different for us as is, let's say, for a company that is building maybe a solution not for the financial sector, and that's sort of like focusing on sort of making sure that whatever you're building is bias free. You're building, I mean, if you're building a machine learning engine or a decision making process, you gotta have to sort of make sure that there's no bias in that decision making, and that's extremely rigorous process. You have to kind of do it diligently. It's not something that you could just wake up and decide. I mean, it has to be a sort of a part of your process and thinking process and design process from day one. Aspects of privacy, aspects of accuracy, aspects of safety, aspects of responsibility, like protocols and how do you sort of handle the high risk cases that are flagged by the AI, and what happens when an AI risk assessments differ from a human expert opinion. Aspects like, as I say, I mean, on the safety side, ensuring that AI programs can appropriately respond to human users so as to not worsen their emotional state or accidentally facilitate adverse situations. Accuracy is really important. I mean, correctly determining emotional intent will be very important. I mean, a system free of biases. And the last one, privacy. I mean, we talked about privacy. I mean, privacy is of prime importance. So we take all of these different aspects into consideration, and they're all stuff that are crucial for us to succeed as a business and as a technology company. I mean, the bad thing is that there are a lot of models out there that are biased. That's the bad thing. The good thing is that they won't be there for too long because it's a self-weeding out ecosystem. So if you have built a model that is biased in some way, where it's biased to an accent or biased to a type of human population, eventually what that means is that it will be inaccurate. Over the course, your inaccuracies will come to fruition, and by natural selection, that solution will be destroyed or weeded out of the market. And that's what we see all the time. Right. So it is in their company's best interest to make sure that you're building a bias-free system, but it's a continuous battle, and we certainly focus on that quite a bit. One of the big areas of focus for us is privacy is probably the most important area of focus for us, especially because we're selling into banks.
Yeah, for sure. Privacy is a concern. Like just today, I was talking to my husband, and somehow Google came in the conversation, and my Google started speaking. And then the second time, what happened was I was talking to my son, about something, and all of a sudden Google again started speaking, and she was like, okay, this is your address. And I'm like, I never asked you that, I don't know. So these kind of things really pisses people off. Okay, the assistant is always listening and stuff like that. Maybe that is not that much of a problem in the customer care because you voluntarily started the conversation and it's going, but still privacy is a problem with all of these kind of things, right? And you brought up a really good point which I want to talk about. So you mentioned just the emotional state of the user and trying to help them out during the conversation. Just today, we had throwdown. I do a throwdown every month where we are trying to benchmark different voice assistants for different things. And today's topic was anxiety. And we were looking at how these voice assistants deal with anxiety. And one of the things which came up was the user said in the anxious tone, if the user says, like, I missed my mortgage payment this month. Okay, so Alexa would say, I'm sorry, I did not understand what you meant. And Google was like, okay, we are in the same boat or something along those lines. But none of them were really helpful. But like you mentioned, when we are talking, the tone of the voice or even the words which we have said, they don't understand. So what are you doing in order to understand, make sense of the words which they have said?
Yeah, but I mean, I think the example that you raised is a good one, right? So maybe that particular phrase, but you could say the problem is that Alexa and Google are only processing your words. That's the only thing they're processing. And if you take the tone away, then those words can mean many different things based on many different things. It could mean that you're happy. It could mean that you're excited. It could mean that you're angry. It could mean that you're terrified or scared, but you don't know because all you're saying is say the word I'm mad, right? You could say I'm mad in a very excited way, or you could say I'm mad in a very happy way. You could say I'm mad in a terrified way. How do you know? I mean, your tone says that. But the thing is that if you're actually measuring that signal from the tone, you actually don't even need to understand that you've said I'm mad. Just the sound of I'm mad can tell you if the person is actually happy or sad or engaged or sad. And so if you don't have that ability, you can't really introduce empathy in the conversation. And if you can't introduce empathy, you can't really have a conversation. And so I think that is the big missing piece, which is sort of missing in these interactions.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in future that has to be more emotive, and these companies have to start thinking about leveraging the emotional aspects of things, the tone of the voice. I think a lot of work is being already done in this space, but I'm not sure how much of that is being leveraged. Again, automotive industry is a completely different industry and a complex industry to leverage some of these things, similar to finance, right? Like the privacy, security aspects of things. But I want to see a world where, all of these things come together and the assistants are more emotional, for sure.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's about time, and we're looking forward to some of those experiences coming together. It'd be a really amazing experience where you're actually having meaningful engagements, which are far beyond just the typical sort of traditional transactional discussions that we're having right now with these entities. And the fact is that we're speaking to devices more and more. I mean, it's not just our voice assistants, it's our phones and our cars and our navigation units, and pretty much across the board, voice interaction is sort of like our preferred way of interacting because it's the most primal, it's the easiest, first off. I mean, and then it's the most primal way of interacting. And so you take that to the next level, even like a small delta in the experience accentuates itself in terms of sort of how that pans out in the overall dynamic. But now some of what we're talking about is not a small delta, it's a massive delta. And so that will then create a whole new set of opportunities in terms of sort of where we can invest in as investors, but also as a focus to start to solve problems as entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are approaching our time, but I feel like the time just flew and there's so much more I want to ask. Maybe I need to do a second version of an interview with you, just focusing on this aspect.
Sounds good. We should do it at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're approaching, I have two last questions for you. So my podcast name is The Future is Spoken. So what does the future is spoken mean to you?
I mean, I think the word future is spoken and the phrase future spoken is essentially all that we've been talking about, which is the future is about spoken engagement and spoken conversations, and more of it, more effective conversations, more impactful conversations, and more meaningful conversations. I mean, and conversations with empathy. And I think that's what future is.
I like that. Empathy. We need to talk about empathy as well in our next conversation. But
For
Rana,
sure.
it was wonderful talking with you. Where can people find more about you?
There's a whole wide variety of ways you could connect. I mean, if there's interest in our technology, go to our webpage, behavioralsignals.com, and reach out to us. I'd be happy to work with you and engage with you. You can reach out to me personally on a variety of different social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or just go to my webpage, which is my first and the last name, ranagujral.com, and send me a message. Tell us how you'd like to collaborate, and we'll work together. Thank you.
Sounds good. We'll make sure we add all of this in our show notes. Thank you so much, Rana. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Likewise, Shyamala. A real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you would like to post a voice comment, please go to www.witlingo.com/daa. That's www.witlingo.com/daa. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, you can find all the information on becoming a certified voice interaction designer and show notes and more at our website at digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. We encourage your feedback and questions. Be sure to get in touch by using the Digital Assistant Academy's website. We will include the show notes link. In our next episode, Julie Daniel Davis speaks with us about voice in education. Until next week, take care.